I have already done a review of Gods of the Forbidden North Volume 1, which provides a broad overview of the book. And this will have way more spoilers than that, and I strongly recommend that you do not watch this if you are a player. The analysis series is a focused, deep dive into what it is like to actually use this book to run this campaign, which I have been doing personally for several months now. I'm also just focusing on Volume 1 of a 3-volume set, and there are a myriad of connections from Volume 1 to Volume 2, but I have only had to use Volume 2 content for the first time last week as we reach session probably 20 of the campaign. So Volume 1 will get you really far. And this is not like Curse of Strahd, where you're expected to proceed along an adventure path style design towards a big bad boss man. This is an open world sandbox for your players to explore in any direction in any way they want, with dozens of detailed encounters in specific hexes, 6 major dungeons, and a myriad of random encounters by terrain type. And as a general rule, it is more challenging the further north that you travel, but the difficulty presented across the entire map is significant. PC death is common, and there is a meta plot, but it is entirely possible to play 20 sessions before the players even realize how powerful some of the entities in this campaign actually are. I know that because mine did. And as I said in my review, Gods of the Forbidden North is a solid 10 out of 10. I love it. You should buy it. I consider it to be the gold standard of high quality setting design. And I will be critical in this series because I'm shining a bright light on the practical implementation of the work, which is the most challenging part of any role-playing game design. In my video, RPG Content Often Sucks, I talked about how products are written for reading and they're very difficult to actually run. Now, this book does not suck, but as amazingly good as it is, actually running it is still very hard. And some of the issues stem from the nature of books as a medium compared to more flexible stuff like wikis. Every campaign setting helps the GM with their 3 fundamental tasks to some degree. Rob's work provides a huge amount of creation, presenting a coherent fantasy world with unique elements, and I covered a lot of that in my original review video. And his descriptions are excellent as well, giving you a lot of guidance on how to present this world to the players. And he does even provide some new rules for relevant issues like hypothermia. But you still have to implement that at the table. So you're going to need to read a large amount of text, not all of it right out of the gate, but a lot. Volume 1 can be divided into roughly 3 phases of deployment. Arrival, where the PCs become familiar with the game world. Consolidation, where the PCs become established and feel grounded as a social group in this new place. And projection, where the PCs feel strong enough to project their power against the strongest forces on the overland map, Mega Dungeon notwithstanding. I have provided these rough level guidelines here, but this will vary significantly by group. And based on Rob's calculations, most characters can reach level 7 on just the static encounters and dungeons alone. But if you add in random encounters, any extras that you have on your own that you make, that number could go up. If the party starts trying to delve into Volume 2 content, they really should have an average level of 7 or higher to avoid getting crushed. The arrival phase will mostly occur on this part of the map, the Boreal Zone. The intended start is in Valkengard, along with 2 other sizable settlements, Skullberg and Kankel. 4 of the 5 dungeons can also be found in this part of the map. Now, unencumbered movement in OSE translates to 24 miles a day of travel, and these are 6-mile hexes. Rob provides a helpful chart on road distances so we can easily tell that it's 96 miles from Valkengard to Kankel. Road movement is 50% faster, but even at 36 miles a day, that is still 3 days of travel. Now, going off-road, you're going to lose that bonus, and in the forests, hills, and bogs, you're going to be going even slower. At some point, the players are going to start establishing themselves in a particular town or maybe in a location that they seize from the enemy. And then they can access the tundra and polar areas of the north. You will notice that the encounters are much further apart in these regions. Travel is going to be even more difficult, and very few souls venture this far north. It's a great big howling empty to a certain degree. The jewel of the north is Castle Tharganon, the mega dungeon built by the Skull God. We'll get to him later. And there are entrances across the entire overland map that connect downward into the underworld of Volume 2, with Castle Tharganon existing on both maps. So how do you prepare to run this massive location? How do you absorb all this information about what's going on? How do you manage this level of cognitive load as the GM? There are 4 categories of essential information that I think need to be given to the players in large quantities early on, but still going strong even deep into the campaign. We want to turn these from GM burdens into something that the players have a responsibility to read and share with their companions. So I'm going to pair each category of information with a role to give each of the players a way to help you transmit that information to the party. So the party is assumed to be coming north from the Hadean Empire, this being their most far-flung possession. There is a lot that they should already know about the culture and religion of the Hadean people. So I think that one player should take on the role of being a theologian, independent of their class choice, someone very interested in this information. And the Hadeans have been interacting with the Enoruuk people that are native to this land for over 20 years now. That's a lot of stuff to know as well. So I think one player should take on a kind of archaeologist role, interested in learning as much as they can about the Enoruuk and then distributing that within the party. And then there's the extremely hazardous environment of the Forbidden North. Someone should be a Voyageur type, knowledgeable about how to stay warm, setting up camp, navigating through the snow, and so on. And there are a lot of languages in this setting and many things to record for the party's own sake. So I suggest that someone in the party should be a chronicler, responsible for keeping records of the clues, tips, warnings, and all the other random bits of information that should come down to life and death at some point, and you're going to need to know them. So someone needs to be responsible for writing it down. Now, I'm going to talk about each of these things in turn to show you what I mean, but throughout this entire analysis series, I'm going to be coming back to these concepts again and again to show you how to shift the burden during play and make it easier to be the GM. In Rob's game world of Magis Terra, Gods of the Forbidden North takes place in just this region. The Romanesque Hadean Empire is expansive, but in a state of collapse, and the PCs are assumed to be fleeing to this region to escape that carnage and forge a new life. Up here, the Hadeans are few in number and concentrated in the cities of Valkengard and Skalberg. These 2 cities don't get along, and there is some nuanced politics here. Rob provides these excellent lists of behavioral traits and cultural values. The theologian player could be responsible for knowing these lists very well, asking about whether various NPCs are exhibiting these things when the GM forgets to mention them, and offering commentary and judgment when someone violates these conditions. For example, since there is a focus on donations and gifts, if they observe the other PCs spending all of their treasure on themselves, the theologian could comment on how poorly they model Hadean charity. This transforms the player from a passive participant into a collaborative world builder with the GM. But of course, the theologian's main duty lies with religion, and the Hadean faith is beautiful and complex. All of this information could be given to the player as a handout, and then they could offer their insight in-game on its contents. The rites and traditions of the church are extensive, and a player would be able to easily communicate this stuff. such as the obligation to confess one's spiritual vices and evils once a month, or the explanation of the significance of religious icons. Then we have the Enoruuk people that are native to this land, and they are also divided, but by religion rather than politics. There are three religious factions: the Red Crowns that see the Hadean Empire as an opportunity to improve their situation, the Sky Keepers who are still connected to the old religion, and the Magoth, a secret cult organization that most people are unaware even exists. And neither do you. Shh. The Archeologist player could be a native or just a keen Hadean, and they know about these divisions within the Enoruuk religion and how to navigate those conversations. And they could also be aware of all the behavioral traits, cultural values, and how the religion of the Enoruuk people is different from the Hadeans. For example, the Enoruuk often violate personal space. They have female druids and bards instead of a male clergy, and they don't worship gods as much as they live in fear of them. And all of this stuff is vital to know, vital to communicate to the players, and I think that a player should help take some of that load off of the GM. The religious landscape of this game is incredible, and the GM should not have to carry that burden alone. Turn the players into your allies in this endeavor. There is so much information to communicate, and it is a huge cognitive load to handle by yourself. I wish I had done a better job of this myself in my own campaign, honestly. My own cognitive load has been maxed out a lot of times, and to get down to my capacity, which is pretty high, I think, and I love this stuff, I have to just leave things out sometimes. And part of doing these videos is to help me see what I can do to help myself deal with these problems. And we haven't even talked yet about the environmental dangers, which are pretty extreme. Not only does this region have long periods of sunlight and darkness like the real world, but climate zones that have their own increasingly dangerous temperature issues, aligned with a progressive hypothermia rule in the appendix based on paralysis saving throws. 4 failed saves and you freeze to death after just a few turns. And it gets very cold. The frequency of these saving throws is based on air temperature, which is in turn affected by weather and air conditions that vary by season. Tracking all of this is exceptionally hard on the GM, but if you had a Voyageur player, they could make all these rolls every single sunrise and every single sundown. There's no reason why the GM has to be making these weather and temperature rolls. The Voyageur could tell the party what to expect for the day or for that night and what clothing to wear, and so on. One of the few things that I think Rob actually missed is clothing items that will help you protect against hypothermia. You're basically only limited to magical solutions, and my characters were desperate for protection in the face of these rigorous checks. So I have imposed a personal house rule to fix this with handcrafted Enoruuk clothing available for 25 gold that reduces your temperature level by 1. And I allowed my players to craft custom clothing from giant otter pelts that they got. That will reduce it by an additional level. What this does is shift that temperature barrier up so that in giant otter pelts, at worst, you're going to be checking once per hour in some of these horrific situations, which could still leave you dead in 4 hours. But that's way better than 4 minutes. And if you look at the weather charts, you can see it's generally colder at night. So you could further house rule that they can't wear armor and this weather protection, and allow them to stay warm at night even if they struggled during the day, because at night they don't need to wear their armor. Because as written, if you are struggling during the day with temperature, you're probably going to die that night unless you find a really good shelter or build a big fire. So I think having these climactic effects is really good. It's just hard to manage for the GM. And that's why I think a Voyageur player role would help a lot. Which brings us to our last category of information: language and records. This setting has a ton of languages, and I often have trouble keeping them straight myself as the GM. I think a Chronicler player would really help them manage not just the language situation, but the mountains of information that they're going to acquire over the course of the campaign on locations, people, quests, monsters, items, and so on. Tracking everything they have experienced will be very hard, so I think you need to go beyond just simple note taking. So I feel like these player roles are critical to lightening the GM's load. This book is packed with incredible, awesome content, and you don't want it to overwhelm you and never make it to the table. So that's what I think is most critical for you to understand as you orient yourself to run this enormous campaign. It is a massive beast, but it is worth it. In the next video in this series, I'm going to present a vision of what I think is the ideal way to bring the characters into this campaign, and I will show you how to lean on all four of these player roles to help you pull it off. Until next time, Chubby Funster out.